If I had a knife, I'd cut your throat. That was the first thing that was ever said to me by a detainee in Iraq. And it was from a Sunni imam named Abu Ali. Abu Ali had joined Al-Qaeda because he needed protection from Shia militias. After the fall of Saddam, Shia militias had entered his neighborhood, assassinated his best friend, and forced him from his home. He joined Al-Qaeda because he had nowhere else to turn. And Al-Qaeda provided money and weapons. He recruited fighters for Al-Qaeda, and he blessed suicide bombers before they carried out missions. After Abu Ali said to me, if I had a knife, I'd cut your throat, I asked him, why? Why do you have so much hatred for me? We've only just met. He said, because you caused all this. You caused our lives to be this hell. And I said, Abu Ali, why did you join Al-Qaeda? He told me the story of how he came to join up. And I said to him, Abu Ali, I'm sorry. I apologize for the mistakes that America has made at the beginning of this war. And I'm sorry that we allowed the Shia militias to run free, and that we didn't offer hope to or help to the Sunnis. And he was touched by that. In fact, he cried after he heard that apology from me. And then I offered him the chance to work together. I said, Abu Ali, we can't change the past, but what we can do is we can work together to build a safer Iraq for your kids and for my kids. And then I painted for him a picture of his son and my son one day walking through the streets of Iraq in peace, where Sunnis and Americans work together in a spirit of cooperation. Abu Ali eventually provided us with locations of Al-Qaeda safe houses that were used for suicide bombing operations. At one of those houses, we captured the man who ultimately led us to Abu Musab Al-Zarqawi, who was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the man behind the suicide bombings, the man who had effectively started the civil war in Iraq.
Yeah!
Everybody in this room right now has every tool they need to be an effective interrogator. You have a chair, you have a brain, and you have a heart. And that's all you need. You don't need water. You don't need your hands. You don't need rope. You don't need any other devices of torture and abuse. An effective interrogator is one who can build a relationship of trust with the detainee. They approach every interrogation in a spirit of cooperation and negotiation, not in a spirit of dominance or in a spirit of retaliation. You have to approach every detainee as an individual, a person with unique motivations, and somebody who has motivations for the reasons that they joined Al-Qaeda, and for the reasons that they picked up arms against you. And until you understand those reasons and you can sympathize with them, you cannot convince this person to cooperate with you. You have to avoid stereotypes. I was told over and over again, by many people, before I got to Iraq, that everybody who joined Al-Qaeda was a committed ideologist that believed in reestablishing a caliphate, and they hated all infidels from the West. This could not have been more false or misleading. And my experiences in Iraq led me to conclude that 90% or more of the fighters that Al-Qaeda recruited in Iraq joined sheerly out of protection, because they needed a way to protect themselves and their families and have access to future jobs. There's also a host of criminal investigative techniques that we use every day in criminal investigations in the United States that are ethical and legal that we could be using in interrogations. And we're not. That type of cooperation already happens between military criminal investigators and civilian criminal investigators, but it's not happening between military intelligence interrogators and criminal investigators in the United States. But we have a unique opportunity with the Presidential Task Force to include some of those methods and replace some of the methods that are ineffective, such as fear of harsh or pride and ego down, techniques that are meant only to manipulate fear or to degrade or humiliate prisoners. Let me tell you why torture is not only counterproductive in the short term, but also in the long term. Torture, first of all, just hardens somebody's resolve. We know from the experience of our own prisoners of war and past wars that when somebody's tortured, they'll give you the minimum amount of information, they'll say whatever the interrogator wants them to say to stop the pain. Any information that's received from using harsh techniques like waterboarding is very suspect. And ultimately, our enemies will use the fact that we torture prisoners or abuse prisoners to recruit new fighters. So if you stop one short-term attack by getting information, you won't be able to stop 100 or more new fighters who have been recruited because you've used torture and abuse. This isn't hypothetical. This is exactly what was happening in Iraq. I listen day in and day out to foreign fighters who were captured say that the #1 reason that they decided to join Al-Qaeda was because of torture and abuse committed in Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib. 90% of the suicide bombers in Iraq are foreign fighters. If you work out those numbers, even in a very rough form, we've lost, most likely, close to the same number of people as we lost on 9/11 because of our policy of torture and abuse. Why is it important that we have accountability and that we set the example from the top down? The large majority, about 90% of our military interrogators, are young Army troops. Many of them that I led in Iraq, it was their first time outside the United States. For many of them, it was the first time they'd ever talked to a Muslim when they sat down to interrogate a high-ranking member of Al-Qaeda. These people have the best of intentions, but they're impressionable. And when the example from the top is a wink or a nudge, that bending the rules or breaking the rules is okay, that we can do whatever we have to do to get the job done, then those young troops take that to mean that they can act on their own outside the rules if that's what it takes to accomplish the mission. It's extremely important that leaders set the example for these young troops. I oversaw interrogators who had come from Guantanamo Bay, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And some of them had been there when techniques were allowed, the enhanced interrogation techniques, such as abusing prisoners through assault, or humiliating prisoners by desecrating the Quran, or other techniques that we knew clearly were illegal. We were trained that these techniques were illegal when we went through the interrogator schoolhouse. We were briefed on Geneva Conventions. We were taught the law of armed conflict. And why then did the rules change when we got to our deployed locations? I believe it's because it was a failure of leadership. Those people who are in leadership positions who failed to enforce the rules that they knew were established after World War II. World War II interrogators were very effective in extracting information. In fact, American experience in both the Pacific and European theaters was that relationship building and showing compassion to prisoners often yielded